Greetings and welcome to what I believe is the 19th episode of Morrowind Modding Interviews. With me today is HeadlessWonder and SkyDye, authors of Vibrant Morrowind. Thanks for agreeing to do this interview.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And right away we're going to go ahead and get started with some of our basic intro questions. The first of which is, when did you first start playing Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls in general?
I believe I started playing Morrowind, it was probably 2004-ish. I can't really remember exactly, but the game was not exactly brand new when I started playing it. It was my first Elder Scrolls game. I never played the previous games, but my neighbor, who is a game freak, he said, I have this game, it's really cool, so you should totally play it. And I remember loading it up and having no idea what to do. There were so many choices, and I didn't know what anything did, and I was hooked immediately. Like, I'm totally into details, so it appealed to me just based on that. And then as I played more, I really started to love the how open the world was and just how much story and lore was in it. So I think it was 2003, 2004.
I'm not sure of the exact time. I guess it was 2002. I played Daggerfall a lot, and so I was very interested in Morrowind. But when I started to look at the game, the graphics I just didn't like the coloring. So that was my first idea: is I need to pick up a graphics mod.
Oh yes, and we actually have a question related to that, but that's a bit later on. My next question, though, is how much of the original Morrowind have you played through over the years, and how long after starting did you start to mod it, per se?
I think I started modding within the first 6 months of playing. I didn't even really know what that meant when I started doing it, but I've actually, shame on me, but I've never actually finished the entire game in terms of the main story and all the side quests. I have a habit of playing, and then I see something that I could change, and so then I I stop playing. So in fact, I didn't finish both expansions. I think I only finished that, maybe Blood Moon. I finished Blood Moon.
I pretty much right off the bat didn't play the game. My first goal was to go ahead and get mods to replace the textures, and then after that I just got into texturing. So I played zero of the game, maybe 2 to 10 hours worth of actual gameplay.
Oh yeah, this kind of sounds like the typical modder response, honestly. I think a lot of modders haven't actually finished the game, or many of the factions involved in it.
That does not surprise me at all. Um, Here, I kind of thought I might be an exception, because it seems like so many other modders seem to know vastly more than I do about all of the intricacies of the game. So I kind of feel a little better now to know that that's common for people who get into modding.
Yeah, I would think that once you get seriously into modding, it's really hard to finish the game, or especially to play other people's expansions and their mods that add quests and things like that. It's just a hobby that starts to consume more time than playing games.
Oh yes, definitely. And I think a lot of modders, what they end up doing is maybe they start reading the UESP Wikipedia pages on Morrowind to just sort of figure out all the plots and the factions and everything that happens so that they can make better mods.
Yes, I have absolutely referenced those pages myself. They come in really handy when you have not played as much of the game as the people who you're modding for.
Yeah, I only thing, because I didn't do factions and all that stuff. The only thing that I use those pages for is just to enter cheat codes, because it made it easier to get around to different areas and not worry about monsters and stuff. Because I'd be more invincibles. I'd be able to fly around to different zones using those codes, without having to recast levitation, stuff like that. So those codes came in handy for me.
Oh yeah, I think pretty much every modder is guilty of entering player's set strength to 1,000 or something like that. Now, moving on to the next question, what inspired your forum handles?
Well, a phrase that I have used frequently for a very long time is that I feel like I'm usually running around like a chicken with its head cut off. So I guess that's sort of where Headless Wonder came from. And I think I also wanted something that was gender neutral, just to avoid some of the oddness, the weirdness that can happen when you're a female in a gaming community.
My handle when I was playing Daggerfall was Blood SkyDye. I just, for some reason, I like the name Blood SkyDye. I just came up with it, and it's stuck. So when they had a handle that I had to enter for Morrowind, community and stuff, I just picked SkyDye. A lot of people thought I was a woman at first, and I never corrected anybody. They finally figured it out, but I never really corrected anybody. I didn't care that they thought I was a woman.
But anyway, moving on to an actual modding question. What was your first mod, and how did you get the idea for it?
SkyDye and I were actually talking about this recently. I think that the first mod I released was House of Tapestries. I mean, forgive me, it's been like 10 years ago, so the timeline gets a little screwy, but as I recall, I was working on Vibrant Morrowind when I started work on House of Tapestries, which probably is not as well known. Most people probably have never even heard of it. But SkyDye brought to me these meshes that I think Smite Plight did them. They were self-hanging tapestries that could be used outside of the CS. So the basic premise was you just drag it out of your inventory, you drop it, and it hangs, even if it's just in midair and there's nothing for it to attach to. But what started out as a small project kind of ballooned into a big project, which happens often with me. And instead of just doing some tapestries, I had to then make a shop so that you could purchase the tapestries. And of course, then I ended up having to do custom NPCs, which was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but it was great fun. SkyDye, it seems very common for SkyDye to say, hey, this sounds cool. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, it sounds great. And then I end up just getting completely obsessed with it. So I'm almost certain that House of Tapestries was the first.
Yeah, the first mod I started working on was a tapestry mod. And like Headless Wonder says, I think the guy's name was Smite. He went ahead and gave me some self-hanging tapestries that I would just be able all set to use outside. The thing is, I never finished that mod. That was one of the many mods I started doing, and eventually went on to something else. I spent years doing those tapestries, getting pictures, cutting out the pictures, changing the size, changing the look of the pictures. And that's when I started first using Photoshop and making major changes and stuff. But I ended up never releasing it. It was just something that I started but never completed, never on a release standpoint.
Oh yeah, that kind of makes me wonder, what is your experience with feature creep? I mean, do you run into that sort of issue a lot, where you start something simple and then you just have to keep adding on and on to it?
Yes. Yes, absolutely, yes. Even mods that I've done just for my own personal use, I may have an idea for something simple, and then I go, well, this would be cool in it. Well, and that could be different. And oh, I should add this because that would make sense. And so what should take me a few hours to build in the construction set, I end up spending weeks on it. And it's only for my consumption. So you can imagine how that might play out if I'm doing something that's going to be for public consumption.
I kind of like art as a hobby. So when I was doing tapestries, it didn't matter how many hours I spent. I knew I was going to use maybe one out of every 100 of the tapestries to make the game, maybe even less than that. But I just like doing the artwork.
Oh yeah, I was just sort of curious, because it does seem like a ton of modders run into the feature creep habit, where they can't exactly get it to the point where they want to release it, because there's always something new to add.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many mods I have sitting on my hard drives that I have spent hours upon hours on with the intent of releasing, and I never have, because they never felt complete. even though I'm sure that they were, I'm sure that to a user of the mod, they wouldn't feel like anything was missing. But uh, such is the brain of a modder, I guess.
I'm kind of a little bit different in the way that I know something has to have a start of and a near completion and a release date. With Vibrant Morrowind, it was always important for me to keep a release date. So on something like that, I had to release dates. But on other mods and stuff, it was whenever I finished something or I felt it was good enough, then I would release it. I'm not really one of those perfectionists that are never satisfied.
But anyway, moving on to some more specific modding questions. This first one here is a question from Melkor Dark, and it is, do you feel that the original game is too dark or depressing? And what prompted making it more vibrant?
I didn't feel that the game was too dark. For me, it was really just sort of muddy and monochromatic. While I do understand why Bethesda needed to utilize the textures in that way based on what PCs at the time could handle, I mean, the original texture sizes were very small. It certainly lacked contrast and interest for me. So when SkyDye approached me when he was working on Vibrant Morrowind, I thought that was a really cool idea. So yeah, for me, I think it was just the opportunity to not only add more contrast to the game, but just to add more visual interest so that every zone felt different, which is strange because so many of the textures are shared from zone to zone, but it really was just being able to tell this is a new area, and every time you entered a new zone, there was something new and would pop out at you that maybe you wouldn't have noticed before.
Well, I had played Daggerfall, and although the colors were basic in Daggerfall, they were colorful. So as soon as I got into Morrowind, I noticed these colors are really lousy. Like HeadlessWonder mentioned, it had to do with the fact that I think they were designing it for Xbox, so they had to dumb everything down to make Xbox compatible with how small the texture was going to be. I decided I was going to download a texture pack because I was just starting it and I didn't know what texture packs were or anything. And somebody suggested Fantasy Color Morrowind. So I went ahead and downloaded that. It was nice and colorful. And I thought, wow, this is really great. And then I turned around and the guy said, I'm sorry, it wasn't supposed to be Fantasy Color. It's supposed to be Visual Pack. So I downloaded Visual Pack. And I just wasn't happy with Visual Pack. I liked the Brash's Fantasy Colors, so I decided to go ahead and go with Fantasy Colors. And it was only a matter of time before I decided to do my own Vibrant Morrowind.
So this is another question from Melkor Dark. Does your vision of a Vibrant Morrowind extend beyond textures? Do you ever imagine something like maybe a Morrowind for kids, or simply have a desire to add color to the game by visual cue only?
Well, for me, being that I came into Vibrant Morrowind sort of as an add-on after it was already being worked on, I suppose I didn't really have initially any vision for a Vibrant Morrowind, but I do think that SkyDye's idea for it is really based on visual cue only. It wasn't so much to make it more kid-friendly, like something like Morrowind for Kids would do. It was really just to give it more visual interest.
Yeah, Morrowind for Kids was one of Brash's projects. Since Vibrant Morrowind was just adding on to what Brash already did with Fantasy Colors, Morrowind for Kids was a project she was doing at the time, and it was going along pretty well, but I think it just got too complicated and she never finished the project. So it wasn't really a switch over to play for kids or a switch over to do anything more than visual cues only. Later on, I started adding trees and lights, but again, it was visual cue only.
So I'm sort of curious, have you two ever considered possibly doing something a bit different, like going into the sort of more expanded content for Morrowind or something like that, instead of just textures?
I have dabbled a bit with 3D modeling. Not much of that has been for public consumption, simply because I'm not as adept with that as I am with texture making, but I do enjoy adding things that did not already exist. Outside of that, though, for me at least, I don't feel like I've had the time or the stamina to do much more than textures, because it really does take so much time and so many resources when you start extending your efforts into creating completely new things or trying to keep something cohesive when you move from original Morrowind things to perhaps like Tamriel rebuilt, things like that, that other modders have really done a great job with. It just becomes, I think, a lot more resource and time intensive when you start moving into things like that.
I don't know about original content. I did work on a tree mod, which was a plugin. I worked in Vibrant Morrowind. I did start doing a landmass, but I didn't like the way the textures laid on the ground because of the way they had the engine overlay textures. So I dropped that project. But I really never got into the working with meshes that much. I worked with Tamriel rebuilt for a while, but gave up on that project simply because it was just completely disorganized at the time.
Yes, and sort of going on with Tamriel rebuilt, we have another user-submitted question here from, I don't know how to pronounce this at all, Tumadri Isim Corazon from Morrowind Reddit. And it is, you two seem very interested in enhancing the world of Morrowind. What do you think about mods that instead seek to expand the world, such as Tamriel Built or Wizard's Islands, and what do you think about the distinction between those two pursuits? For example, expansion versus improvement.
Well, first, let me see if I think it's Tu Madre Es Mi Corazon, with no Spanish accent there because mine is terrible. So if I have mispronounced, I'm very sorry. In terms of the question, though, I really think that both pursuits are valid and both are valuable in sustaining the lifespan of Morrowind. I do find that both come with their own perks and their own challenges. So, for example, expanding, as I was saying before, really takes a lot of dedication and time, but it does allow for an incredible option to create something where there was nothing, or perhaps by building significantly on what is already there. On the other hand, enhancing the world by making textures or perhaps improving meshes, doing that in a way that remains cohesive and yet does give each zone its own distinct character can be quite time consuming, and it does require a good deal of thought. For example, a lot of meshes in Morrowind, the original meshes, share textures with other meshes, and they may not necessarily be in the same zone or even on the same type of object. So what might need to look like stone or maybe bone on one mesh, it may need to look like plaster on another mesh. So unless you want to go through and edit all these meshes and redirect their paths to new textures, that certainly comes with its own challenge there. So when you're working only with enhancing by doing textures, that's a huge limitation, but it does have the perk of kind of being the last step. Whereas expanding, you really have to start over from scratch, and you don't get to that last step until you've done 6 or 7 in between. So I think they're both great. They both serve their own purposes. But for me, I just found that working with textures ultimately it gave me more leeway in terms of time management, if that makes sense.
I liked land masses. I thought they were good ideas. I also like the idea of expanding, and I think Carl, Qarl, did the underground, where instead of doing a landmass, he realized that once you go into the game and go inside a building, you can pretty much go any distance you want because you're not walking on anybody else's territories. So that's another good idea to do, open a door and go into a space that you can occupy as much room as you want without the game worrying about territories being walked over. So they're both good ideas expanding on the game, and there's always room for doing that.
I totally agree with what he just said, actually. I think it's a brilliant idea to create these large spaces that are interiors, because Morrowind is so modded at this point that finding any free area to even put a building can be quite challenging.
Oh yeah, and speaking of that, I believe it was Shannon Workman was one of the modders that was really advocating for interior landmasses, which is designing landmasses and interior cells. But it is kind of difficult to do since Morrowind doesn't have the capabilities of what Oblivion and Skyrim have, where you can just create separate world spaces and then use the terrain editor like you would with the regular world. In Morrowind, you have to use unique land meshes, which may not necessarily look all that convincing from a distance.
Oh, yes. That's something that I love about Skyrim, but I also kind of hate about Skyrim because it certainly has its own limitations in terms of levitation spells and things like that. So I guess it's all on what you can work with, really.
I've never worked with Skyrim, so I don't know how that engine works. But yeah, Morrowind was what it was. I mean, it's a great for doing what it did at the time, but it is dated.
Oh yes, and sort of going into that, that crowded land masses thing is, I was curious, have either of you played any of the more recent updates to Tamriel Built or Province Cyrodiil or Skyrim Home of the Nords? I mean, Tamriel Built just came out with a new update this last month with a demo version of the city of Almalexia, which has been a pretty major change.
I honestly haven't had time to play much of anything in quite some time, so I have seen some information regarding those, and I think they look super interesting, and it's on my to-do list in terms of things to try when I have some more time to actually game, which I have no idea when that'll be.
I spent so much time on working on textures that once I finished the last texture pack, which was, I think, released in 2003 or 2005, something like that. But I had only worked on textures and I hadn't played much of the game. And so I don't know what the current stuff is. Like I said, I'm 10 years away from the game. So, I'm glad that Tamriel Rebuilt is still doing things. I'm glad people are still doing things for Morrowind. I think that's great. I've just been out of the community for so long. I don't know what the new stuff is.
Oh yeah, understandable. And sort of going on to some more texture-related questions. This next one is again from Melkor Dark, and it is, where do you get your source images from? Do you get them from websites, image archives, or digitally painted or self-taken photos? Or is it a combination of the above?
Definitely a combination. We did find a website that has wonderful textures. Most of them aren't actually textures. Some of them are already seamed. They're seamless tiles, but most of them are not. So there was still quite a bit of work going into using those resources as a base, but they had such a vast selection. It was all very high quality images. It was great. It took us a while to find that, but when SkyDye told me about it, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. I don't have to do more work than is necessary to make these a useful base for me. So we certainly did get quite a few resource images from there. I know that I took quite a bit of resource photos myself because I knew exactly what I was looking for and I couldn't always find that. So that was super helpful. And and I know SkyDye did as well, I did do a lot of textures from scratch, just hand painting them in Photoshop. So it really was a combination of all of those things. And ultimately, even if you're using a resource image as a base, there's so much digital painting that goes into that to not only make it well tiled, which SkyDye is absolutely amazing at. I just want to put that out there. I did very few tiled images. He tiled so many images for me, and he's so amazing at getting rid of the visual patterning that you notice when you're a little far away from the mesh. I can always tell the difference when I see his textures and someone else's who may not be as adept at picking that out. So thank you so much to him for doing that because it made my job so much easier. But ultimately there is still a lot of digital painting that goes into making it great, seamless, and also sort of making it fit with the game so that it doesn't look like you've just taken a photograph and pasted it onto a mesh. So that was a long answer, but yeah, it's still a lot of work.
Yeah, I used all of the above. For skies and things like that, there wasn't a lot of images I could use. I mean, I would use an image, but then I'd have to smear it and color it and do so much different and seam it and do so much different things. It was really more a matter of digital painting. Source images were hard to get when we first started texturing, but I found a site that I could take my own pictures and submit to the site. It's CG Textures, which is now called textures.com. And I would get a lot of source images from them. And I had gotten pretty good at seaming, which if people know textures, they know what seaming is, and taking away patterns from seamings. That I would also give some to CG Textures, which is now textures.com. So, you know, all the extra stuff and things like that, I would give to them so they'd have a bunch of textures they can go ahead and use for the industry and stuff like that. It was very important, like Headless Wonder says, that a texture looked good from a distance. When you get up close to a texture and it has a crack through it, it looks good. But once you get to a distance and you see a crack through the texture, that pattern comes very apparent, especially when the texture is repeated over and over. Imagine just having a bullseye in the center or something, and from a distance, that bullseye is very apparent. So patterning was very important to me. It had to look good from a distance.
Oh yeah, and I think you guys really succeeded in that aspect. I mean, Vibrant Morrowind looks amazing with Distant Land and the Morrowind graphics extender and graphics overhaul. So I really do think you guys did an amazing job with the texture work, and it holds up very well under, modern day Morrowind mod usage.
Thank you. Like I said, I really have to credit SkyDye a lot for how great it looks from a distance. I did a lot of painting, but that was him. So
I think Headless Wonder is working on an update because they now support normal maps. So I think she's working on an update to normal map everything. When she's done with all of her work, if she needs me to do some normal map for lands textures, I'll do it. But she can also do the normal map herself. I think that would add a lot to the new graphic engines that overhauls use.
yes, I am currently working on that when I have free time.
Since you mention it, that kind of makes me wonder about, have you been checking out some of the other texture mods that have been released in the more recent years, like Logan's bump mapped texture series, which do a lot of bump mapping to the textures of the architecture sets of like Great House Halalu, and I think maybe Rodarin as well.
I've tried out a few. I wish I could tell you what they were, but I don't recall. It's been a little while. With my current install, obviously I have Vibrant Morrowind installed, but prior to that, I was just using what came with the overhaul, and I thought those were fairly well done. Actually, they're pretty well done. I shouldn't say fairly. But it was pretty amazing when I reinstalled Vibrant Morrowind so that I could start working on the normal maps. Just how bright everything really was compared to so many texture mods that are out, even the modern ones. So, but I will say that so many of the texture mods that I'm seeing being released in the last couple of years, it's really come a long way in terms of what people can get their hands on in terms of resources. Photoshop is more readily available for people with the payment plans and the monthly subscriptions. So I just think it's great that more people are able to really create some great visual mods, because all of these things are so readily available to them now. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but from what I have seen, people are doing a great job. I just don't have the time to try everything out.
Well, if you have a choice between doing a bump map and a normal map, I would say doing the normal map, because the normal map gives you more of a 3D perspective, whereas the bump map only gives you a limited dark to light perspective. So a normal map is much more complicated, but you get greater results with different angles from a normal map. I'm not sure everybody knows how to do a normal map. I know it's easier. Programs will do a bump map automatically for you. But if they get a chance, they should get a program called Crazy Bump. That will really help them out make normal maps, and they can do much more complicated textures because the new engine will support the normal maps.
All right, sort of moving on to our next user-submitted question. This one is from Illy on the Bethesda forums, and it's, Vibrant Skies has a really lovely, bruised and alien look to it, like the Aetherius is just sort of belching out Sor Magica, and I was wondering, how did you achieve that effect?
That was all SkyDye. He did the skies, and I completely agree with Illy. The first time I saw his skies, I fell in love with them. I remember him asking me if I thought that they were too much, and I'm like, no. Like, the red sky for storms was my absolute favorite. I loved that texture, so certainly I'll let him talk about how he did it, but I wanted to put that out there. I loved those skies.
Unfortunately, the skies had to be removed. People were having a problem on the first on Vibrant Morrowind 3. I think I did skies for Vibrant Morrowind 1. I did skies for Vibrant Morrowind 2. I did skies for Vibrant Morrowind 3. But when it came to Vibrant Morrowind 4, because people did not know how to clear the skies from their game if they didn't want the skies, because it is a dramatic change, we didn't include that. And I just made on Vibrant Morrowind 4 the skies as a separate release. Unfortunately, the skies don't play nice with today's renderings of overhauls and stuff. So I had to take down Vibrant Skies, and I don't know if you can get it anywhere at any sites, but it's currently not available just because it looks pixelated and really bad by the way a modern engine renders the skies with their shaders and stuff like that. So it was taken down. As far as how I made it, there really, I'd take a source image and just use smears and techniques like in coloring and techniques in Photoshop to just blend it all together and make it look as creative as I can, almost like a painting.
Oh yeah, I think Vibrant Skies is actually still available from Morrowind Modding History. They tend to, collect pretty much every mod in existence on there. So I believe it is still available for people to download today.
Yes, pretty much all of our mods are available on the Morrowind Modding History website. I would encourage people to also check the Nexus, though, because I have been trying to upload updated permissions, and also I've worked on updating House of Tapestries because it was really terrible. The clipping was awful. It was my first mod, so I was just trying to get that more functional. So definitely in the next couple of weeks, I'll be trying to get everything uploaded to the Nexus as well, and it will all be updated content.
My theory was there's a lot of sites that hosted mods. So I'd make mods for different sites. And back then when the site went under, I figured, well, the site went under, whatever I made for that site which was specifically for that site, went down with the ship. So I really wasn't concerned if a mod stayed for a complete lifespan. The only thing that had a problem with was when Planet Elder Scrolls went under. That's where Vibrant Morrowind 3 and that's where Vibrant Morrowind 4 was hosted. So when that went under, and then there was some controversy with people selling mods through some place and things like that, that's when HeadlessWonder and I decided we better upgrade permissions that nobody can use it and sell this stuff, which was never had necessary before. And that's when it got loaded up to Nexus.
Oh yeah, Morrowind Modding History was started a long time ago to sort of save all the mods that were being lost from the Morrowind modding websites that kept going down, like Gamers Rome, Alaric Melbourne, or something like that, and Planet Elder Scrolls. And as you mentioned, there was this whole fiasco back in, I think it was April, where Bethesda decided to let people sell Skyrim mods, and that caused a huge mess, and a lot of Morrowind modders have been updating their permissions of late in order to try and avoid that situation coming down the line to Morrowind in the future.
Yes. I am a Steam user, So I saw what was going on very quickly. And, I do understand the perspective of modders who are hoping to make a little coin on doing what they love to do. But SkyDye and I, maybe we're just a little old school. And we were never interested in donations or making money on basically what was a hobby for us. So when I saw that, I did talk with SkyDye about it, and we decided to just unfortunately update our permissions, which were always pretty free use. I mean, the only limitations we ever put on people in terms of redistributing our content was that if they did decide to include it or redistribute it, that all credit was given to the appropriate authors. Because some of our mods did include work from other people. So when you start talking about a paid mod situation, in my opinion, it gets really messy unless every bit of the content in your mod is your own. Because then you're collecting money for other people's work. And it may be someone such as SkyDye or myself who are adamantly against paid modding. So it really was just a circus, in my opinion, and it divided the community in such a vicious way. I mean, the vitriol that I saw on the comment threads at the forums, mods being taken down left and right. I mean, it was really just so much unnecessary trouble, in my opinion. So yeah, I am updating permissions just to protect the work of the authors we included in our mods. I certainly don't want my work used for paid modding, but I was more concerned about protecting the integrity of the work that was included that was not ours.
From a business standpoint, I think Bethesda was just looking to make money off of modders. That's all it really came down to. Because you had to, from what I understand, you had to release so many mods and make so much money before you would get a percentage. It was nothing more than commercialism by Bethesda to take advantage of modders. That's all it came down to. And I completely disagreed with the whole idea of somebody making money off of somebody else's work, especially when permissions needed to be out there. And it was a community thing. Communities make mods, not one person, because you still need help from the community to learn how to make a mod. You can't just do everything on your own.
Oh yeah, that was one of the major arguments against paid modding back when that fiasco happened, and it was quite honestly probably one of Bethesda's biggest mistakes, and they reversed it pretty quick. I think the paid modding situation only lasted for about 3 days.
Yeah, it was a handful of days. I think they saw the sheer number of people who were like, "What are you thinking?" And really, I do give them credit for remedying that situation quickly, although I don't think it should have been a situation to begin with. But it was what it was, and ultimately good things did come out of it because there was a huge influx of people coming back to the Nexus and to other websites who hosted old mods. Maybe it was because they wanted to update their own permissions. Maybe it was because they wanted to snag mods before they were removed. But it really did put a focus back on not just Skyrim, but previous Elder Scrolls games. So if anything good came from that, I would say that was like the shining thing in the pile of crap that was paid modding for that 1 week. So I guess you just have to find the good in that, really, you know?
Yeah, I would say the only good thing that came out of that for us is we realized Planet Elder Scrolls went under and we had to update our permissions and re-release Nexus. So that's probably how this interview came about, that you came across the mod on Nexus and you decided to go ahead and do this interview. Otherwise, I don't think you would have found the mod on Planet Elder Scrolls. Plus, Planet Elder Scrolls went under.
Oh yeah, I had seen some references to Vibrant Morrowind on Morrowind Modding History, but it wasn't until you guys uploaded it to the Nexus that it really caught my attention. But sort of getting back on topic, this next question is from Mr. Swiveler from the Bethesda forums, and it's, do you still make textures for computer games, whether Elder Scrolls or otherwise? And if not, is this something you foresee doing again in the future?
I still do make textures for Morrowind now and again. Again, mostly for personal use. Also, yes, I am working on normal maps for use with the overhaul, but that's very slow going. So I wouldn't expect to see that finished anytime in the coming. Well, probably not by the new year. Uh, Outside of that, I just really love making textures, so maybe I'll reinstall Morrowind periodically, and then I'll think, well, I could use something like this for this particular playthrough, so I'm going to work on that. And I always do so with the intention of possibly releasing it, and I think maybe my brain works in that way so that if I do release it, it's not half-assed. Excuse my language, but outside of that, I have made textures for a handful of other games. I have made some textures for Skyrim, again, mostly for personal use. I did make quite a few textures for Oblivion, some for personal use, and some were actually distributed, and I was kind of working on them in the background. It wasn't under my name, or my handle, rather. I do believe it was for Bu's body. It was for a robe conversion from Morrowind. I think it might have been Canadian Ice's huge robes pack. They needed hoods for all of the robes, so I worked on those. I did all of the textures for those, and I also did a lot of normal maps for that particular mod. Outside of the Elder Scrolls series, I did do some textures for my own use for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I love that game, and the textures were really terrible. So I tinkered around with that here and there. In terms of doing more textures for public consumption, I honestly can't say. I mean, I barely have time to game anymore, let alone commit to a texture project. As SkyDye might tell you, I'm very much a perfectionist, and it takes forever to get any kind of finished product from me because I'm always trying to make it better. So he and I have kicked around the idea of possibly working on new textures at some point for Morrowind, but it's always been sort of understood that it's a really big maybe, that it would be fun to do, but maybe neither of us have the time or the stamina to pump out something of that magnitude again. That having been said, trying to do smaller texture packs zone by zone, neither of us are very good at that, I think, because once you've finished one zone, then you want it to be cohesive. So you end up doing much more work than you set out to do to start with. So I would love to do more textures, but I honestly just don't know.
I kind of stockpile textures. In order for one texture to be released, I would have to do maybe 200 textures before I would settle on one to be released for Vibrant Morrowind that would actually make it to Vibrant Morrowind. So I was doing so many textures that I was actually releasing texture packs to the community. Plus, I was also making texture packs for CG Textures, which is now textures.com, and they would be used professionally. So I did do a lot of texturing outside of Morrowind that wasn't used for Morrowind. But as far as making textures lately, I haven't made any textures since 2005. I could always pick it up and make textures again, but I just really haven't found the need or the want to make textures. Maybe if we pick up a texture project again, I would give away a bunch of extra textures that I wasn't using for the game. But that's if we ever start doing textures again.
So, just out of curiosity, you mentioned before that you prefer doing, a complete texture overhaul instead of region by region, but that is sort of the typical way that most modders release texture packs these days, is by region or by architectural set. And also, I was curious if you guys were planning to maybe do a sort of expansion to Vibrant Morrowind to include Solstein or Mournhold at some point, since I don't think those were covered in the original Vibrant Morrowind packages.
That's something that we both talked about doing when we were working on Vibrant Morrowind. And honestly, at least from my perspective, I mean, it took us about a year to complete Vibrant Morrowind 3. It took less time with 4 because we did recycle some of the textures that I still thought would work for Vibrant Morrowind 4. But when you spend that long working on something, I think when you start considering more work, you just don't have it in you to do it. I do think that modders can get to that point where they're just so burnt out that they need to just stop. And that ultimately for me was that was the case in terms of not including any expansions. That said, I've still been kicking the idea around of including those if at some point in time SkyDye and I start working on textures again.
Yeah, and for the island expansion, whatever it was called, it would basically be HeadlessWonder's work on that. I can make seamless textures for her to use, but since it's all architectural stuff, that would be her forte. As far as Blood Moon was concerned, a lot of that was just plain snow, and there's only so much you can do with snow, so it really didn't interest me. I did in Vibrant Morrowind 2 do the snows and give them some colors and stuff. So in Vibrant Morrowind 2, that was done, but it wasn't an area that interests me too much.
All right, going over to our more general modding questions category, do you do any planning before you start a mod, and if yes, how?
In the most general sense, I do. Generally, I have some sort of idea in my head of what I want things to look like, even if it's just a matter of a color scheme or what kind of stone do I want. I mean, I'll have some sort of general idea. And then I set out to find appropriate resource images, whether it's to build upon or just to refer to when I'm doing my from scratch painting. So there is, I guess, a certain amount of planning, but I do think since we're just doing textures, it's a lot less planning than would be required if I were doing some sort of world building. If I'm making, even just a simple building, I think that really does take more detailed planning beforehand.
My idea is just to plan out zone by zone, because there's so many distinct zones. I want each zone to have its own look. Sometimes because the way textures are repeated, you can't get the look you're looking for with each zone. But it's always a good idea for me to plan out each zone with its own scheme first. One thing though is I would finish the zone, think the textures were all good, then HeadlessWonder would submit her work for that zone with the buildings and stuff. I would look at the buildings that she made, look at the textures I made, and realize all my textures were not up to par with her buildings. So once she would release some architectural buildings and stuff, I'd pretty much have to scrap the area and start all over again to match what wonderful work she had done.
Now, sort of off topic, I'm just kind of curious, how exactly did you two start working together on Vibrant Morrowind? I mean, I don't think we covered that in a previous question, but it does seem to be a rather unique partnership that you two have with making textures.
That's actually kind of a funny story. As I was saying, it's actually a pretty funny story. SkyDye and I initially met at an unofficial Morrowind forum, and sort of got to know each other just a little via banter in the forum threads. So at one point, SkyDye mentioned to me that he was working on this thing called Vibrant Morrowind, and he had this floor texture that he had been tinkering with and just wasn't happy with. So he asked me to take a look at it to see what I thought. So I opened it up in Photoshop and took a peek, and I do believe it was actually like the slate tile floors for the Redoran huts, if I recall correctly. So I tinkered with it a little bit and I sent it back and said, does this work? And he said, wow, this is great. Do you want to maybe do a little more work in this area? So I thought, well, that sounds fun. I had only done a tiny bit of texture work at that point, and I mean, it was just like color editing existing textures to my liking. So what started out as a small request ended up ballooning into multiple areas, more and more work. And I found that I really enjoyed it. So, I don't know, I guess it just kind of snowballed from, can you take a look at this texture and tell me what you think?
I had already done Vibrant Morrowind 1. I had already done Vibrant Morrowind 2. And I had been working on tapestries for a long time. I think the working title probably was Vibrant Tapestries. And so since I was working on tapestries, Headless Wonder and I started exchanging tapestry pictures back and forth for some reason, and then working on tapestries. We actually started messing around with tapestries before we started doing Vibrant Morrowind. I realized it was Canadian ISIS forum outside of Bethesda's. I realized that she was really good with dealing with people. And back then, I was a hothead and couldn't deal with people. I couldn't run my own thread without getting in arguments with people. And I realized she was such a diplomat with people that I wanted to bring her on, if to do nothing more than help me run the thread and get different people's work. It just happened to be that she was good at making textures. I didn't know she was going to be good at making textures. I just gave her small requests here and there for the new project, Vibrant Morrowind 3. And the better she started getting the textures, the more I realized this was going to be great. It ended up, she never did help me run the thread. I had to learn how to deal with people on my own and quit worrying about trolls. But as far as me first wanting to work with her, it was basically because she was good with people more than I really cared about her work, because I didn't know her work at the first.
Which is pretty funny, actually, because I didn't really know any of his work prior to him asking me to take a look at those initial textures. And it's funny that he mentions that he ended up not being able to sort of use me in the capacity that he initially planned, because I was completely content to just hunker down behind my monitor and make things. That was what I enjoyed. So I really didn't. He's right. I very rarely popped into the threads, the work in progress threads. People used to joke all the time with him that Headless Wonder must be a figment of his imagination or some alter ego, since we were never in the same place at the same time. Even once I started popping in now and again to post screenshots, it just became a running joke that that I didn't really exist. So I guess I wasn't too helpful to him in the capacity that he hoped that I would be. But as far as the pairing, I don't know that it's unique, but it has worked very well. Like I said, I'm a perfectionist, and he's not really. He's much more capable of looking at something and saying, this is good enough. This will work. Whereas I'm over here going, no, that detail isn't right. This color isn't right. I don't like the shape of that. So I used to joke with him all the time that he was a slave driver, because he would always be on my ass about getting those textures done and like getting to the release date, which we kept pushing back because I couldn't finish my textures in time. So certainly where I was a little bit weaker, he was stronger, and vice versa. I'm terrible with landscapes, and he's amazing with them. I still look at his textures even all these years later and think, wow, he did a great job on that. I always did all the architecture and the miscellaneous items, furniture, things like that. And he always tells me that he can't do buildings to save his life. So it really just was dumb luck almost that we complemented each other so well in the ways that we do.
Yeah, I used to release things under different names, so people at the forum got used to me creating names. So they did think Headless Wonder was just another name I was working under. And so when she didn't check into the thread and stuff, people just assumed that it was just another pseudonym I was using. So she never really got the full credit for Vibrant Morrowind that she should have, because people just looked at her as a secondary person, not realizing that most of the work was her work that would inspire anything for me to do in detail afterwards.
Well, it's certainly a very fascinating partnership that you two have going, and it's really amazing that you two are, I'm assuming, still sort of working together after all these years.
We actually don't really work together anymore. We became very good friends in the process of spending that year making Vibrant Morrowind 3. We're very different in a lot of ways, but we're also very similar. And so all these years later, we're still very good friends, very good personal friends, even though we live, across the continent from each other. So ultimately, that is what I've taken from working on Vibrant Morrowind with him. It's developing that camaraderie with someone and that friendship. So it's just very cool.
Yeah, I look at it as Vibrant Morrowind was just something we did. Basically, the friendship was more important. That's why it was really hard at the end of the first year, wanting to get a release date for Vibrant Morrowind 3 and pushing her to release it, because it was important for me to release Vibrant Morrowind before Bethesda released their next game, Oblivion. I wanted to get the release date before that the Oblivion was released. Otherwise, we'll miss the mark and lose a lot of people. But the friendship was already, by the first year, pretty strong and stuff, that we knew that we were going to be friends for a long time, and that Vibrant Morrowind was just something we did.
Well, certainly a very cool result from working together on the same project. And, sort of getting back onto topic a little bit, this next question is again from Illy, and it is, are there any modders who have inspired or influenced you in some way with your textures, perhaps? And if so, what was it about their work that inspired you?
Oh, there absolutely were. There are so many, I don't think I could list them all, actually. When I came into modding initially, like, really novel things were buzzing through the community. So, it was during that time, I guess, in the Morrowind modding community when people were really starting to figure out how they could push the capabilities of the engine. So things that no one thought they could do, suddenly they could do, which was amazing. Generally speaking, though, any modders that had a good eye for detail really, really impressed me. I remember installing Red's heads when I first started getting into mods, and I was just blown away by how great they were compared to the original heads that I'd been using prior to that. I mean, I remember even opening them up in Photoshop because I decided I wanted like a different eye color or something for my character. And just looking at, even though they were small file sizes, they were just amazing to me at the time. So he and his wife, they did a great job, and they made me feel like that particular mod made me feel more comfortable making Morrowind more beautiful, rather than feeling like everything I did had to be completely lore friendly. So outside of that, like the Better Bodies team, amazing. They did a huge amount of work, and so much, so many mods now really are based on that work that it's almost required to even play the game now for most people. Let's see, Loch Norris, he did amazing texture work, and his races were really great. He also became a personal friend of mine. Solaria, amazing. Alien Sloth, her textures were all hand painted, which was so impressive to me because they were great textures. And they were so different, really, from what everybody else was doing at the time. The Serious Snape at the time was doing a lot of texture work that was really, really good. Hurdy-Gurdy did some robes. I remember just thinking those were amazing because that was prior to Better Bodies, so that was really the only robe available for the female body that didn't just look like a blocky mess. Like, those were amazing. Emma and Grumpy, again, amazing. I know I keep using that word, but at the time, everything was just so new and so novel. And I mean, even now, their work is impressive. Sadly, we did lose Grumpy, but it's amazing to me that so many people will remember him for the work that he did. Carl, as Headless or as SkyDye was saying earlier, he did a huge body of work, and it was all very novel in his approach. Corana did a lot. She was very prolific. I know I'm forgetting to mention people. There were so many. But, I mean, ultimately, the level of detail that people were cranking out, it just kept me on my toes so that my work would blend seamlessly with most of the mods that were being used at the time. So it just felt like everybody was working to set the bar for everyone else, if that makes sense. So there's no way I can remember them all, but there were just so many.
Well, I could go ahead and do shout out to different people. I mean, back then the community was very competitive and everybody was doing their own things and everybody was creative in their own ways. But as far as who inspired me, that's a different story because I went my own direction. Brash's Fantasy Color was the thing that inspired me. What she did was completely recolor the world with Bethesda's own textures, and I thought that was brilliant. She had one texture that everybody did not like. It was purple tapestry textures, And they were telling her, hey, could you just change this one texture? We don't like this texture. Her attitude was, no, I'm not going to change it, because if I change that texture, then other people will request this change and that change. And the more I start changing, the more I would be doing the game for you and not for me. I thought that was a brilliant idea. So when I started making textures, I did the same thing. I used her approach, which really influenced me a lot, of sticking to my guns, having my own vision, and doing what I felt that I wanted to do, not what other people wanted to do. So she was a heavy influence on me. The other influence was Carl, Qarl, because he was the first one to teach me how to do seamless textures, so I can start making my own textures from scratch, which is something I did not know how to do. Other people inspired me with great works, the early people, but they didn't as much inspire me to do my own thing, which was what Brash inspired me to do.
All right, so moving on to the next question. Have you been influenced by any non-Elder Scrolls games when you mod, and presumably this mostly goes for making textures?
Yes. A good example, not always, but a good example of that would be one of the unfinished mods that I have sitting on my hard drive somewhere. I've spent many, many hours on that. It just sits there. But I was working on the meshes and doing some textures for the Telvanni pods, which to me always they seemed a little blah in the execution. Like, the meshes were so interesting and the idea was so interesting, but I never really saw the interest, I think, that could be there, the potential. So I spent a lot of time editing the meshes because the UV maps for those were very twisted and distorted, and it really made texturing those difficult, which is why I never textured those for Vibrant Morrowind. So anyway, the content that I have sitting on my hard drive right now that's not yet finished, it actually was inspired by a zone in a very old DOS game called Dragon Lore. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's very, very old. It was like for Windows 3.1 even. But there was a section in the game where you kind of shrink down and you're exploring these very wild mushrooms. And that's what I always saw when I was roaming around that area in Morrowind with these pods. And so I got the idea in my head to make them very mushroom-like, very very organic. So I guess that's the only area where I was strongly influenced by another game, but that was very clearly in my head when I was working on those textures. So maybe one of these days they'll be released. Maybe one day I'll upload it to the Nexus and people will wonder if I was taking acid and why the hell I would think that I should release something like that. But after I got those meshes, after I got the UV maps fixed, working on those, it was, I think, the most challenging work I've done, but it was also the most fun.
I've never directly worked on another game. I was influenced by the colors and stuff in Final Fantasy VII, and so that's where I got inspiration for the direction I was going. As far as making other textures, I made textures for CG Textures, which is now textures.com. I made a lot of seamless textures for them. So I'm sure that some of those textures were used in other games that got released professionally.
Going into this next question, we've already kind of covered it several times now, but it is, what modding projects, if any, are you currently working on, or perhaps would you consider joining ModTown 2015? Hint, hint.
Yeah, as I was saying, I am working on the normal maps for Vibrant Morrowind 4. I have kicked around the idea of going back and working on the Telvanni pods, and at least getting that pushed out for use. As I said to you, I am considering ModTown 2015 in the event that I know that I can commit to a deadline, since I don't have a lot of time right now. But I think it would be a really fun project to work on.
No, I'm not really working on any other projects and stuff. I haven't taken a look at your ModTown 2015. I know you have a YouTube on it, but I only briefly looked at it. It looks like an interesting project, but as far as making textures, it looks like you guys are doing a great job at making textures. So I don't know what I would be able to ever add to a project like that.
But moving on to a different kind of question, do you listen to any music while you mod? And again, this presumably goes for making textures. And if so, what do you like to listen to?
Almost always. I almost always have music on no matter what I'm doing, but it really depends on my mood. Oftentimes, when I'm making textures or world building, something that is mellow works best for me. I do believe that Vibrant Morrowind, most of that was probably made to like Fiona Apple and Billie Holiday and any kind of, mellow classical violin. But yeah, it can be anything from classical to blues or even, mellow folk. So now and again, I needed something to keep me awake, though, at 4 in the morning when I should have been sleeping, and I was still working, trying to get those last few textures finished. So, I might put on something that was more up tempo, but for the most part, I work best to mellow music, including, of course, the Morrowind soundtrack. That was a regular on the playlist.
I would actually do my own music mixes. I would take game music and do mixes and stuff in my Soundcraft mixing board and come up with these big, long set lists where I interweave songs together and stuff like that. I even released a bunch of the stuff under the name Vibrant Music, but I had to take it down eventually, those releases, simply because people were saying I didn't have permission to use original music, even though I was trying to tell them, you're not getting one song, you're getting 3, 4, 5 songs overlaid to each other. So you can't cut one song apart. And since I'm not selling it, it was legal to do. But people were having so much problems with the releases and telling me I was breaking laws and stuff. Nowadays, you can do a mashup and get away with it. But back then, they didn't understand permissions and copyright laws. So eventually it was taken down. But I did hundreds of hours of mixing music and stuff to listen to while I was gaming, and did release some of the stuff.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing your Vibrant Music series on Morrowind Modding History where they're still sort of available, and I was kind of curious what the idea behind them was, and I guess you just sort of explained it right there.
Yeah, it was pretty much something to listen to. And since I'd always liked some of the old radio DJs, there's one in Los Angeles, Jim Ladd. He used to overweave songs over songs and just complicated cut-ins and things like that, where it was, a set list would be a lot of different complicated songs. I like that idea of mixing music together. And so that's pretty much what I was going after. One song cue sound would trigger the next cue for the next song. And it was all mixed into one continuous set. So I liked doing that, and I liked listening to it. So I did that a lot.
Now, moving on to the next question here. I'm not entirely sure how this applies to you guys, but if you could make a single change to the capabilities of the construction set, what would it be exactly?
Well, I guess for me, it applies quite well. I know most people know me only for my texture work, but I have done quite a bit of work in the construction set. For House of Tapestries, I did make a shop, which, like I said before, has been updated to be more functional since I wasn't so familiar with it at the time. But I've done so many personal mods even since then that I've definitely been using the construction set quite frequently. For me, it was really just the navigation in the render window could be really frustrating and arduous sometimes. Just doing things at the speed you would like them to move, or rotating around at the angle you wanted quickly sometimes could be a little frustrating. Or even just being able to zoom into excuse me, into the spot you wanted to look at, but not being able to get just the right angle because you'd overshoot or you'd be too far away. So for me, it would be just much better navigation for the render window.
For me, it would be the way the ground textures are laid. If you take 2 ground textures and lay them next to each other and they're different ground textures, the game would go ahead and mesh them together and overlay them so they look like 2 things melting into a cohesive connection point. But if you tried to do that with 3 textures, it would box the textures out and square them, and they wouldn't mesh over each other. So that would be a major change I would like to have seen made. Simply because from a texture point, if it was worked out to textures would always overlay, I can hand do every single texture in the game and lay them across and make different texture zones. Like the mountains would be mountain textures, the path would be path textures, the grass would have different zones. It would be much easier to do.
Oh yeah, and I think I've heard those suggestions before from modders that we've had on previous interviews. Those both seem to be somewhat, common complaints. And going on to this next question, which again you guys have already sort of answered, but have you gotten any help from other modders with your mods? And if so, how have other modders helped you?
Oh, absolutely. As I mentioned, Vibrant Morrowind does use some content that was done by other modders. There were some meshes included that were done. God, I think they might have been Carl's. They were some miscellaneous items that had improved meshes. There certainly is a list in the credits of people who contributed, even indirectly. House of Tapestries, I do remember Smite helping a bit when I was trying to make sure that the tapestries were functional, since they were self-hanging and there were some script issues that you could run into. But he did directly help with that mod, which was much appreciated. Redwood Tree Sprite, she contributed some Asian prints to that mod, so that was really helpful. Also, even with that particular mod, Motaki did the animations for the head for the NPC who sold the tapestries in the shop. That was my first real contribution of a mesh that I had done, but I wasn't able to do the animations. So he was hugely helpful in doing the animations for that. I also forgot to mention earlier, actually, it wasn't for Vibrant Morrowind or for House of Tapestries. It was for a mod I was working on for Oblivion. I was working on some caster robes because Oblivion, I don't know, I was kind of not happy with the caster selection, and I tend to gravitate toward that a bit. But I did meet someone at Fliggerty's forum who agreed to make some meshes for me for that. I do believe the name was Resolve That Chord. I think that was his or her name. And I just want to point that out because I never actually finished that mod. So they agreed to make the meshes for me, and I wasn't able to finish it due to some stuff that was going on in real life for me. So thank you so much to that person. I'm very sorry, and I swear I'll try to get it out at some point. But, as I'm sure you know, finding modelers can be very difficult. So I was super appreciative of that.
My help came actually from a professional who owns textures.com. He taught me how to do a lot of complicated things in Photoshop and how to make very complicated textures with overlays and different things I would never have thought of. He was really great at helping me how to hone my texture skills. And for thanking him, I would go ahead and make them some seamless textures and give them to them. As far as influences, we used a lot of other people's stuff, and the permissions in Vibrant Morrowind list all the different things we use from different people. But they didn't really influence me as much as we just included their stuff into our things.
Sort of on a similar note, how much do you use the community to get feedback and motivation for your mods?
In terms of feedback, I generally stick to troubleshooting. It's lovely to read positive comments, and it's great to get constructive criticism. I mean, that's really helpful. But honestly, I really was just happy kind of keeping to myself and making things. So I do think that part of the reason for that is when you start reading all the feedback, especially when your project is still considered a work in progress, when you have a lot of people weighing in, not all of what you're getting is constructive criticism in terms of, hey, you forgot to add this here, or that texture has a mistake, or something glaring that needs to be fixed. you start getting a lot of suggestions. You know, maybe you should try this, maybe that should look this way. And while I understand the drive for people to do that, I found that that can really interfere with what I see in my head in terms of what I'm trying to do. So, you know, certainly that can make your mind go in 50 different directions when you're trying to take into consideration this person's opinion or that person's opinion. And then you can end up with something that it ultimately is not cohesive. And when you're trying to please people, then there's a real risk there of getting away from your own vision for what you wanted to do and what you want to put out there. So certainly that was a call that I made just to kind of save myself the risk of things getting too complicated. So I love constructive criticism. I love praise. Everybody loves the praise that they get, especially when you're kind of flagging and you're getting burned out by that huge project that you took on. But as for motivation, I really love perusing other modders' mods when I get the chance and seeing what people are doing. It's really cool when you see something that someone else has done and you think, wow, I never would have thought of doing that. Why didn't I think of that? So, you know, sometimes in world building, I can personally be a bit linear. So when I am looking through other mods, or maybe I'm perusing forum threads where people are talking about things that they're working on, I see other modders using assets in really, really creative ways. And that always gets me thinking about how I can be more creative in my use of assets, not necessarily just in my texture making, but in my world building, even if it's just for my own personal use mods. So similarly, seeing how great some of the textures are that are floating around out there, you know, that motivates me to always make sure that I am putting my best work out there, and really to trying new methods to get to that point. So that's a long answer again, but I try to limit myself, I guess, and also try to balance that with keeping up on what other people are doing.
Yeah, I can say for Vibrant Morrowind, maybe one out of 250 people's posts would actually address specifically something that can change, that would actually be a positive change to the game. 99% of all the comments had to do with either they liked it, they didn't like it, or this is the change I should make, but without being anything that constructive and would be able to be usable. Simply because Vibrant Morrowind had a clear direction it was going, and people's input was not important. If we were to listen to people's input, every single change would have been made for every single thing, and it would be a complete mess. And I think that's a lesson to people who have a vision, is to take suggestions. Don't be mean about them. Don't say that's a stupid suggestion. Thank them for the suggestion. Or even if it's a negative criticism, thank them for their criticism and their opinion. But stay true to your own vision, because your own vision is ultimately what you're going to be releasing.
Oh yes, certainly a good point. And we have another user-submitted question, again from Illy this time. And you've both been around for a while in the community. Have you noticed a change or difference in the mods that get made today compared to back when you were first releasing Vibrant Morrowind?
I can really only answer that in the vaguest of terms, because I haven't kept up as well as some other modders certainly have. But I do think that when SkyDye and I were still actively modding, mods were very active collaborations then. There was this momentum of sort of innovation at that time. So there were mods that were being released that just like blew people's minds. You know, I don't see too much of that happening now, and I don't even know that that's possible anymore, because so many people have learned so much now about the capabilities of the game engine. But I really think that's something that you can only get when a game is in its infancy. I think there's a huge difference, though, from Morrowind mods up to Skyrim mods even. I'm not sure it's something that I can put into words very well, and maybe that's because the community at the time we were actively modding was so huge. I mean, it was just huge. There were so many people modding. There were so many new ideas floating around. And so many of the mods being released were true collaborations in every sense. So it seems to be more solo work I'm seeing now, and maybe that's because there is so much information available now, and so much is more well known about what you can do with the engine.
I really don't know what's going on in the community anymore. Pretty much in 2004, I stopped really paying attention to what the community is, and really 2004 was, was just off and on working on Vibrant Morrowind, and Vibrant Morrowind was released in 2005, but I hadn't paid attention to community since 2004, so I don't really know what changes. It seemed like the early days there was a lot of innovation, but I don't know what's been changed since then.
Fair enough. And moving on to this next question, which might be a bit dated again. Is there anything you've had to give up to mod or make textures, like playing more games or possibly your social life?
Well, I never gave up my social life, but I definitely didn't have much time to play any games, including Morrowind, when I was actively modding. Generally, if I loaded it up, it was to test textures or to get new ideas for a new area I was working on. I don't know, I didn't really feel, though, like I was giving up gaming. I really loved making textures, so it felt like I was just shifting my focus to a different hobby during that time. So I don't know. I think when you really love something, you don't really feel like you're giving other things up. You're just not doing them for a while.
At first, it was a learning curve, learning how to do textures and working on, doing some music, mixing music and stuff like that. So there was a learning curve when I first started. But I guess within the first year, I got pretty proficient at everything. So it was more of a hobby. I can do it quickly. Like HeadlessWonder said, she was a perfectionist. I was a pretty much this is good enough attitude. So it was all hobby time. I wouldn't say it was really cutting into my free time. It was something that once I got proficient at it, I can spend a few hours doing it and not really have to worry about into free time.
Sort of on a similar topic, are there any skills you've learned from modding or perhaps the drive to create mods? And if so, have you been able to use these skills anywhere else?
Oh, yeah. Patience. I think the big thing I learned was patience. Um, the Imperial Castle set kind of became the bane of my texturing experience, just due to how angular the meshes were. So, I mean, I must have made and scrapped 7 or 8 different texture sets for those meshes, both for Vibrant Morrowind 3 and 4, because I simply couldn't do what I wanted to do with them. I couldn't make them look the way I wanted them to look. The meshes didn't allow for it. So, similarly, I tend to be very detail-oriented, as I said, so it does require a lot of patience when you're trying to get the details just right. I think I learned also to take criticism more effectively. While Vibrant Morrowind 3 and 4 were both very successful texture replacers, they didn't always garner praise. They were significantly different from most everything else that was being put out there at the time. And so what a lot of people would say was it's too colorful, it's too vibrant. And, SkyDye and I used to joke that, well, it says Vibrant Morrowind. Of course it's vibrant. So there were some pretty harsh criticisms of it, and it certainly would be really easy to let those get into your head, especially when something is still a work in progress. And, you're trying to create something as you see it in your own mind, while you have kind of other people going, this looks terrible, it's too much, it's not what should be here, it's not lore friendly, or whatever those criticisms may be. So, I will also say, though, that I learned a hell of a lot about graphics programs during those few years that we were working on that. I was very new to them at the time, so it was all a huge learning curve and a lot of tutorials and a lot of reading. So, I love a challenge. So constantly learning how to make my work better at the time was not only enjoyable, but I took that with me into creating a career as a graphic artist. So what was a hobby really did snowball into some very, very valuable skills for me.
As far as I'm concerned, I went from I was always good at art, but I did not know how to use Photoshop. I did not know how to take source pictures. I didn't know any of the things that was necessary to actually make a texture when I first started. I had to learn all that, and it was a very complicated learning curve at the very beginning. But towards the end, I think it was, yeah, if I wanted to do it professionally, I probably could have pursued and done that. As far as the other thing I learned, patience and dealing with people. When you're running a work in progress thread, like a Headless Wonder mentioned, people had strong opinions about how much they hated Vibrant Morrowind. And when I was doing Vibrant Morrowind 1 and 2, which I basically did by myself, I would argue with people a lot, saying, you don't know how bleeping vibrant it's supposed to be. So when you say it's too vibrant, who cares about your opinion? That attitude of arguing with people. By the time I got to 3, I had a thicker skin on people's comments. And then I got to the point where whatever somebody's comment was, I would just let their comment be. And other people would fight them in the thread saying, how dare you say this about a great mod that we like or whatever. And I'd say, you know, their opinion is negative, but they have a right to their opinion. Even if they don't like it, it's their opinion. And that would pretty much cut down on the trolling and stuff. I let people have their own opinions, and I wasn't too much concerned with how people felt about my work. I didn't take my work as seriously as when I first started. And that's a very valuable lesson to learn.
You know, I do sort of notice a rather stark contrast to the community that you described back in the Vibrant Morrowind days and the modding community that exists today, because you really don't see those sort of negative comments get posted anymore on the major modding forums. Generally, almost all feedback is positive or constructive these days in some degree.
Well, I think that really speaks, though, to the size of the community as well. I mean, when we were modding, as I said before, the gaming community was huge. The Morrowind gaming community was huge. The modding community was very big. So I think most of the people who are modding now tend to be the people who are really loyal to the game, the people who really appreciate the game. And I think because the game is so old that the new people who come in and play it and mod it are sort of the same mindset. So I think that over the years, the more, I'm not sure how I should put it, but the more troll-like types really have just moved on to other games. So what's left of the community, I think, is the best of the community.
Yeah, back in those days, it was the users that were doing a lot of the comments, not necessarily the modders. The modders, we all played nice with each other. We'd go into each other's threads and compliment each other. The modders, as far as I'm concerned, they would say, okay, you're going your own direction, but you know, it's what you're doing, fine. All the modders, pretty much, we played nice with each other. We were a community and stuff, but it's the users that didn't play nice. The users had strong comments like, how dare you make this? This is not my vision. How dare you make this major change to a game? So it was the users that were more active in the community.
I completely agree. The modders definitely were not included in the selection of trolls. So.
Oh yeah, and the community has definitely become a lot more tame these days, but sort of going on, and this is a bit of an off-topic question, but are there any other games outside of the Elder Scrolls series that you enjoy playing? And if so, what do you like about them?
Well, I'm a long-time gamer. You know, I'm in my mid-30s now, and I've been gaming ever since we got our first original Nintendo console. Actually, before that, I mean, we had an Atari before that, but um, I am a huge Legend of Zelda fan. Huge, huge, huge. I always have been. I haven't played too many of the newer games in that series because I don't have a Wii. But I can't really tell you how many times I've replayed the Ocarina of Time because, in my opinion, that's the best one. So I did start out playing that series as a kid on the Nintendo. And maybe it's just nostalgia, but I really love that series. I think I like about it just that it's simple enough to not be too complicated, but I don't know, there was just something, I don't know what I like about it. I just love it. Also, I really enjoy playing like puzzle-oriented games. There was a game called Shivers that was, I think, originally available on what was it, Windows 95 maybe. It was sort of like Myst. It was set in a museum, and there were these entities that were going around creating trouble and killing folks, and you had to do all these puzzles to solve the game. So it was very Myst-like, which I also played and enjoyed. I've never been much of like a first-person shooter type, but I did have a lot of fun playing both Borderlands games with one of my gaming buddies. It wasn't too FPS-like, and it was cheesy, and it had silly lines, and it was just a lot of fun to play a sniper and blow people's heads off with one shot. As I mentioned earlier, also I've replayed Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines on several occasions. The last modern game that I really loved was called Ori and the Blind Forest. I played the PC version of that with like a PlayStation controller, which is really almost a necessity for that game because it's very fast-paced and your fingers are flying all over the place. But it's definitely one of those games that you don't want to end. It's really beautiful to look at, and the story was really great, I thought. I mean, I just loved looking at the game when I was playing it. And outside of that, I'm a huge Portal fan. I've replayed both Portal games on several occasions. I've played a lot of user-made maps for those games, some of which were so difficult that you want to tear your eyeballs out. But the Portal games really have everything I love about video games. They have an interesting story, they have puzzles, like a snarky computer who wants to kill you all the time. I mean, what more can you really want for a game? So I tend to gravitate toward puzzle games and toward dungeon crawlers and things like that.
I had an old computer, and I really had a lot of problems trying to get games to work because the computer would crash on me. So I played up to that point just role play games. And then there was one game, an old Windows 95 game, Roller Coaster Tycoon, the very first one. For some reason, my computer would not crash on that. So that seemed to be the only game I can play on my computer. I didn't know anything about roller coasters. It was a perspective that you had to, you can only use 4 different angles to look at it. It really old game stuff, but you had to design roller coasters. And so I learned how to play that, and I got pretty good at it and pretty excited about G-forces and how to do that and how to do this. Since then, I got a newer computer, and I've tried to learn how to play different games, like first-person shooter games. I'm trying to learn how to do that, and other type of games. But basically, the only thing besides role-play games I really got good at was Roller Coaster Tycoon.
On a similar note, if you could mod one other game that perhaps doesn't support mods, what would it be?
I don't know if there's any one that I would want to mod. I mean, honestly, I think it would just be the whole MMO genre. The whole MMO genre, I mean, you can't... I remember the first time I loaded up WoW, and I looked at the textures, and this was just coming out of releasing Vibrant Morrowind 3. My other half, a friend of his, asked us to play WoW, which I swore I would never do. But he said, well, we can play it together. So... I thought, okay, I'll at least give it a chance. And I loaded it up, and I was like, holy shit, this thing is so horribly ugly. And I knew I wouldn't be able to fix that. So while I love the social interaction you can get with MMOs, I mean, I've run my own guilds. I've certainly played a lot of MMOs, and have buddies excuse me, that I still talk to from my MMO days. I hated that I couldn't mod them on my end, because so many of them, the graphics are just so terrible. Necessarily so, but it's still frustrating.
To be honest, no, I really don't have any ideas of modding another game that doesn't support it, simply because I don't think I can mod without HeadlessWonder. We're a team. And except for doing side projects like, maybe, Vibrant music and things like that, I would not be able to really get into mod without working with a partner.
Now, sort of on a similar note again, do you have a mod that hasn't received enough acclaim as you think it should have had? And if so, which one and why?
No, not at all. I was always really shocked at how much acclaim our mods got to begin with, to be honest. I mean, we didn't we didn't set out to be well known in the community. We just set out to have a good time and make something that we liked. So every time I saw those download numbers crawling up and up and up, I was just always genuinely shocked by that, by how many people enjoyed it. So I guess I would be really surprised, I guess, if any future mods, even now, received the type of acclaim that ours have already received.
Yeah, I would say we weren't setting out to be anything more than a percentage of 1% people would have ever download Vibrant Morrowind or any of the Vibrant series. The goal was not to please everybody. It was just a small, tiny sliver of the market we were after. I don't know how people find mods like that anymore and why people are still interested, but it did a lot better than we thought it would be. And it's nice, but I don't think that I could say that we ever would release anything that wasn't acclaimed. It seemed that these things far surpassed what we thought they were going to do.
Oh yes, and Vibrant Morrowind still seems to be doing quite well on the Nexus. I mean, it looks like it has over 90 endorsements so far, which is pretty good for a Morrowind mod that's been up for less than a year.
I was really shocked. I don't know how many downloads it's had, or I haven't checked any numbers, but I was very surprised at how quickly the downloads started happening. And I mean, as I told you when you let me know that you had done the showcase, I was very surprised and very flattered and very humbled that people still are showing as much interest in it as they are, being that it's 10 years old. I mean, it used to be that you would see people come into the community and they would say, "I'm new, what mods should I use?" 9 times out of 10, Vibrant Morrowind would be on that list. And like I said before, that was always very surprising to me. But I guess you would expect that more when a mod is young, but being how old it is, it's very pleasantly surprising that the interest is still there.
I'm not really tracking the mod, so I don't know how it's doing. To me, I'm surprised at how people find things that old and how word of mouth even travels. I can't believe something that old would still have any interest by anybody. Like I said, when Planet Elder Scrolls went down, I was perfectly fine to let Vibrant Morrowind go down with it. It was only because of the fiasco of them wanting to charge for Bethesda wanting to charge for mods that we had to update permissions and re-upload it. Otherwise, there was no intention of re-uploading this at all. It was just something that had its history, and I felt it's seen its path.
Oh yeah, there's definitely still a lot of interest in Morrowind mods, as, our YouTube channel can attest to. And sort of moving into our final set of questions here, what do you think about the other Elder Scrolls games, like Oblivion, Skyrim, and The Elder Scrolls Online?
Well, I was kind of excited for Oblivion, but I just found it to be very linear and not. It just didn't for me hold up to what Morrowind had been. Skyrim, I have really enjoyed. It felt more like Morrowind, or rather, I should say, it seemed to feel enough like it that I enjoyed it a lot. So I still play it periodically. I still, like I said, make some personal use mods just to have fun with. I did try ESO. I tried the beta, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect from it. I was really hoping to have a game that felt a little bit like a co-op version of Skyrim, because for me that would be like my perfect RPG, something that's in the vein of Skyrim and has all the exploration, but you can play it with a couple of buddies. But ESO for me felt it felt very generic. It felt like it was trying to be like an Elder Scrolls game, but just couldn't do that. And I don't even know if that's possible to do in an MMO setting, because one thing that the Elder Scrolls games really have going for them is how immersive they are. And you can't really immerse yourself when there's a big, giant gold question mark where you have to go for a quest giver, or, if you're playing and you're exploring and oh, it's great, but you see somebody called These Nuts run across your screen all the time. So for me, I couldn't, it didn't feel right. So I didn't even purchase the game, to be honest with you. Um, it was a little disappointing for me.
Well, I like playing Daggerfall a lot. That's how I got into Morrowind, because I like playing Daggerfall a lot. Daggerfall had tons and tons and tons of problems, but it was a fun game to play for its time. So my intention was to play Morrowind, but I never really got around to playing it. Then when I had computer problems and my computer would crash on games, I never got into playing Oblivion. I never got into playing Skyrim. So there's a list of games that if I got back into playing role play games, I would go ahead and play through Morrowind someday, then Oblivion, and then I hear Skyrim just looks fantastic. So that'd be something I'd be interested in playing. But right now, I'm not even trying to play role play games.
All right, and what do you think makes the Morrowind modding community, and this is, of course, the perfect term, so vibrant after more than a decade?
That is very fitting. I think we kind of touched on that earlier. Mainly, I think really it's that the community now is mostly made up of the best of the community. So it does retain enough of this drive to push the limits of the engine, this drive to make more detailed textures, to create new things. And I think that Morrowind is so moddable in every area and every aspect of the gameplay, that it leaves that door open for people to constantly be creating. So I think when you couple that with sort of the paring down of the community and having really what's great left over, I think if that continues, Morrowind will, well, I think the modding community will be very vibrant and very lively for a long time to come.
I haven't followed the community in 11 years, so I don't know how to answer that question. I would guess that would have two major components to why it would be vibrant. One, just the modders that are there now are probably so experienced at what they're doing that the doors are open. And two, the capability of modern computers. Back in our days, if you released a texture pack that was 750 megabytes, that was a huge, huge, huge problem, just because of just the download speeds that people would even download something. Nowadays, you can have mods and stuff that I guess would be 10, 20 gigabytes, and nobody would bat an eye. There'd be more complicated things they can do, and just all kinds of improvements would just keep a game that everybody seemed to enjoy playing fresh and new.
Oh yes, fair point. And again, this next question might be a bit difficult for you two, since you haven't exactly been hugely involved in the community for the past couple of years. But do you think there's anything the Morrowind modding community should be doing in order to continue to expand and grow in the coming years?
Ultimately, I think it just needs to keep doing what it's doing. I don't think that as a community there's much more that can be done for a game that is over a decade old at this point. I guess I would say just keep trying to create things that were not already there. Don't fall into the trap of trying to duplicate someone else's work in such a way that maybe it's that feeling that nothing original can be done anymore. And so people, I think, can fall into the trap of, well, this is similar, but I'll make it just a little different. I think in order for the community to continue to grow, things have to stay fresh. So, people are going to have to be on their toes, I think. But I think that the community is completely capable of that.
Again, I haven't paid attention to the community for 11 years, but I would think innovation is the key. New ideas. I open Morrowind seems like a good idea to to pop Morrowind on top of another engine, that would create all kinds of worlds of new possibilities.
Oh, yes, definitely. And one of our final questions here, is there any advice you'd like to give to budding new Morrowind modders out there, or possibly texture artists, looking to release their first mod or texture pack?
Yeah, I would say keep your mind open, stay open to criticism, don't take things personally, because that will interfere with the creative process. And I would say trust your instincts. You know, not everybody's going to like everything. SkyDye used to have this thing that he said to people all the time. He would say, there is no best in art, only different. And I think that's absolutely true. You will never please everyone, but you do have to please yourself because you're putting that out there. So trust your own instincts. You know, do what you love. You know, make the world what you want it to be. And just be okay with the fact that that's not going to fly with everybody. And that's okay, you know? Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say, I need help. You know, keeping it collaborative, I think, is key to releasing great mods, whether you are an experienced modder or a brand new one. Just have fun with it.
I would say two things. Well, actually, three things are important. One, have a clear vision. You're going to need to follow your clear vision because there are people going to tell you to make all kinds of changes from your vision. Two, make friends with other modders. You're going to need help from other modders. No matter what you're trying to do, you're going to need help from them. Making friends with other modders will make your life a lot easier because it is community. And three, don't take criticism too seriously. No matter how much somebody slams you, don't take it too seriously. There are going to be people out there that are not going to like your ideas. That's okay. Stay clear to your vision. If somebody gives you a suggestion that you think is a good one, take it. But stay clear to your vision.
Very good advice. And finally, this is a sort of repetitive question since I don't know if there's anyone you haven't given a shout out to yet, but is there anyone in the community that you'd like to give a shout out to additionally to everyone that you guys have named previously in this interview?
Yeah, actually, SkyDye, you know, without him, I could not have made the mods that I've made. I would never have gotten as deeply into it as I have, and I wouldn't have had the fun that I've had. So, yeah, shout out to SkyDye. And outside of that, the users, you know, mods are never successful or appreciated without the people who use them. So I guess I would like to say thank you so much for allowing me to be such a part of your gaming experience, because for me, that is what makes modding a fulfilling thing to do. You know, the knowledge that I have been involved in so many people's experience through Morrowind is very humbling, and it's very, very cool. So
I would say Brash, because I've already mentioned her. She was the first one to influence me. And Fleverty, who ran his own forum. He's a good programmer and stuff. And even though I didn't know anything about programming, I had a lot of fun at his forum and made a lot of friends.
Alright, that pretty much wraps up all the questions I have for you guys. So thanks again for agreeing to do this interview. It has been a pleasure talking to both of you.
thank you so much for having us and having such interest in our work.
Yes, it was definitely fun being had.